Jefferson County 911.
Yes, I am a teacher at Highland Park High School. There is a student here with a gun. He has shot out a window. I believe one
I've been Columbine High School.
Columbine was an eye-opener. Mass shootings on this scale weren't common.
People were getting shot all around me. There was a guy at a table right next to us, next to me and her, and they just shot him.
And they especially didn't result in 13 murders and 21 injuries.
Columbine shooting was a major wake-up call for America. It definitely propelled us into this era where we were addressing gun violence, or wanting to address gun violence from a holistic standpoint, and especially starting the argument around, or the conversation around, mental health, which is something that you hear quite a bit in terms of mass shootings and folks that carry out mass shootings.
Columbine's legacy was a stain on gun policy and mental health response. Schools began constructing classrooms with doors that locked from the inside. Blueprints were made of the building so law enforcement could map out escape routes. Police even began to train for mass violence. But on a federal level, nothing changed much.
Unfortunately, although Columbine served as a little bit of a wake-up call, it did not provide the type of legislation or policies to be implemented to prevent future Columbines from happening.
In the years following Columbine, the country would continue to struggle with shootings. In 2020, the Gun Violence Archive recorded 612 mass shootings. In 2021, 692. This year, the trend is continuing.
We are seeing an uptick in gun violence in general, and thus we're seeing an uptick in amount of mass shootings. To be honest, this year alone, we've seen 300 mass shootings, a little over 300 mass shootings only July 6th. On average, we would see anywhere from 50 to 100 mass shootings a year, maybe 10 years ago. And so this idea that it's not increasing is not true. It definitely is. And when you look at some of the factors that contribute to the amount of mass shootings, that's not being addressed either.
In May, 16 were wounded in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, just hours after an NBA playoff game. Later that month, 10 were killed and 1 was shot in a racially motivated attack in Buffalo, New York. After that, the public was on high alert after a school shooting in Texas.
Funerals have begun in Uvalde, Texas, 1 week after a gunman killed 19 children and 2 teachers at an elementary school.
I also think Uvalde was a major thing because some of us that do have kids, or if we're aunties, if we're uncles, we cannot imagine our babies being the forefront.
The Uvalde, Texas shooting left 19 children and 2 teachers dead. It would be the most fatal school shooting following Sandy Hook in 2012, prompting outrage from lawmakers and the public.
Look, this should be a nonpartisan issue. This should not be a partisan issue. There is not a Democratic or Republican value in one single act of these shooters. It's not. But people in power have failed to act.
For a while, it seemed Capitol Hill couldn't settle on new gun laws. The bill that was eventually signed by President Joe Biden on June 25th was the first time gun legislation had been passed in nearly 30 years.
Essentially, it does 3 things. One, it incentivizes states to carry out red flag laws, which, as we discussed, provides for someone to petition a court and basically say, this person, here's evidence that this individual does not have the wherewithal to carry a weapon, and they should not be able to purchase one. So I am excited that that background check would be in place. Secondly, it expanded an existing law, which is really awesome for some of our women that are, as Louisiana, you might know, Louisiana is second in the U.S. for domestic violence, and essentially the Biden law does kind of create a second barrier, especially for individuals getting weapons that have a domestic violence history. And last but not least, it does expand background checks to 18-year-olds to 21-year-olds, which, as you can see in the news every single day, the amount of young folks carrying out mass shootings or just murders in general daily has increased in that youth group.
Some argue that the bill doesn't pack enough punch because it doesn't ban assault rifles, but others say this is the first step to changing a dark legacy.
Absolutely. There's always more that can be done, especially when we're talking about saving lives. As you may already know, about 50,000 people lose their lives to gun violence in this country every single year, and that number is only going to increase if we continue down the path of not having stricter laws. And so for me, I think if the administration would have decided to add stricter red flag laws, stricter background checks, maybe going after permit requirements, because we see that there's a huge gap between the permitting system in our country, and so things like that could have been added. But I don't want to take away from the fact that this is still a major win them, and it will save lives by having the incentives for the red flag laws, but also having that 18-year-old to 21-year-old background check.